Welcome to Let's Just Talk. I'm your host, Kamala. Joining us today is Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party presidential candidate for the United States. And Jill, without further ado, welcome to Let's Just Talk.
Honor to be here. Thank you so much, Hami.
The honor is ours. I want to begin this interview, unlike others, but by giving a little bit of an anecdote. So, because there's so much to discuss, and we clearly won't be able to get through all of it, but I'll do my best to get through as much as possible. A little bit of a backstory. I met Jill on July 24th while covering the arrest Netanyahu protest in Washington, D.C. And she gave this fiery speech about the audacity of both houses of Congress to invite a war criminal into the House of the People, while majority of Americans do not support the ongoing genocidal war on Gaza. And after your speech, there was this long line of people waiting to meet with your supporters. And as I stood there and you shared hugs and greetings with dozens, if not hundreds of people, I watched as your supporters cried in your arms while sharing with you their frustrations with the current state of American politics. So it's only warranted that I begin this interview by discussing the current state of American politics. And as you know, the 2024 election cycle has been nothing short of tumultuous. I mean, former President Trump was convicted on 34 felony charges. There was an assassination attempt on his life. President Biden told us that the only way he won't be running in 2024 was if he got hit by a train. But then he said he's not running. And now Kamala is the Democratic nominee. And we're not even going to touch on the Supreme Court and all the crazy things they've been up to. But can you begin by sharing with us how your campaign has been navigating these turbulent waters? And what are some of the challenges or hurdles you've been facing?
And let me just say how wonderful it is to hear you tell it like it is. There's such a tendency, I think, for people to put their heads in the sand because what's happening is so shocking. You know, what you were describing after, after my remarks, meeting all these people, this is what the last year has been like for me on the campaign trail. It feels like, almost in a way like doing political therapy, or it's like a spiritual exercise to connect with people whose eyes are open, who have not sort of suppressed their humanity, who are really looking at what is happening in the world. And we face, existential crisis really on every front in our foreign policy, in the genocide going on in Gaza, which is sort of like a symbol for our world today. It's just, we're living in a genocidal world, and Gaza makes this all very real and explicit. But that kind of murderous inequality, murderous exploitation, murderous actions of empire are happening, really on a massive scale right now. Not that this is new, empires have always, been abusive and had their colonial exploits and all that. But now it's happening on such a scale, it's absolutely staggering. And we're watching it in real time, being live streamed. And we really have to ask, who are we, and what's our responsibility as human beings, and are we going to allow this to happen? And our political system is kind of a reflection of the same kind of imminent collapse, that the world is not working, sort of the rules of order, whether you're looking at international law or just sort of the glue that should hold our society together, the sense of confidence, the sense of, belonging. The Declaration of Independence says all power, just power, derives from consent of the governed. The governed do not consent. We don't know what our governmental institutions are doing. They are so thoroughly corrupted. So we're sort of seeing this expressed now in what you just described about this election. And I have to say, for me as a candidate, this is my third run. This is like very different. We're in a much more desperate state of affairs. Young people under 25, polls show half of young people are consider themselves hopeless about the future, and 1/4 of young people have considered harming themselves within 2 weeks of the poll because they're that desperate about the future. And young people are in many ways kind of the most compelling commentary on the state of our world. If our world isn't working for our younger generation, it's not working at all. And it's no surprise that it's not working because young people are really just the latest cash cow in a predatory economic and social system that has become so um, unequal, so very harmful in its inequality, that you have 3 billionaires who can have now the wealth of 50% of the population. And this inequity in financial security is reflected then in inequity in political power. So in the same way that money is very concentrated in very few hands, you have political power that is top down, being driven by corporations and very powerful interests, whether it's, above all, it is the war profiteers and Wall Street who are calling the shots, as well as fossil fuels and health insurance companies and big pharma and real estate developers. This is what our policy is all about. The chickens have come home to roost. Life is unbelievably intolerable for so many people. Over 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. The numbers of people who don't have health care, who are mired in student debt and medical debt. Half of all people who rent are basically spending 30 to 50% of their income to keep a roof over their heads. This is not a world that's going to survive in all kinds of ways. It is crashing and burning. The good news, though, is that, there is an uprising in full swing, which is begging for a political voice. And so, we are both in kind of the worst of times and the potential for absolutely, political transformation to happen. And that is the excitement of the hour.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The Democratic National Committee, of course, there is reports that they've been taking considerable steps to consolidate support behind their nominee, Kamala Harris. And there's also reports that there has been steps taken to attempt to pressure you out of the race. Is that something you can speak about?
Oh, sure. Yes. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Um, the press isn't very much interested in this, like not at all, the mainstream press, that is. But, the Democratic Party proudly announced back in March that they were hiring an army of lawyers to throw their competitors like us off the ballot, which is what they're doing. The ballot access rules are extremely repressive in the first place. They require, for example, in New York State, you have to collect 45,000 valid signatures in 6 weeks. This is a really, really difficult thing to do. The only candidates who qualified are those who basically have billionaire funding. So New York State will have, RFK, Biden, Harris, and Trump on the ballot. Just 3 candidates. That's like really, it's shocking. Normally, one has more choices than that. And so the Democratic Party basically has gone to war to deny American voters of choice at the time that American voters have been screaming that they want other choices. And, within the Democratic Party, there has been no choice. The primary has gone from being a rigged primary in the past several elections, the past 2 in particular, to being a primary that's hardly taken place at all, with no debates at all within the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris was basically anointed by the inner circle of power here once Joe Biden was pressured to be removed, but he had been, sort of protected. The wagons had been circled around him so that there was never really a chance to scrutinize him as a candidate. So the Democrats are pulling out all the stops now. It's both the army of lawyers that they're using to remove us from the ballot. It's also they have advertised they've actually done job postings. This is from the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, posted an opening for a job and there may be more than one, this is just the one that we happen to stumble on, that has the gall to actually hire people to manage infiltrators and spies in our campaign. And then the most recent thing is that they hijacked the funding that we were owed. We qualified for almost $300,000 in public funds to complete our ballot access drives. And about 3 weeks ago, they basically informed us that they wouldn't allow us to have the money until the ballot drives were all over, until they were completed. And this has to do with the fact that Congress raided the fund and created sort of an artificial shortage. It's not really a shortage, but there's like a priority list. And technically, if there were candidates that were going to use public funding in the general election, technically they would have priority. But if you accept public money, you can't accept private money, and the Democratic and Republican parties run billion-dollar campaigns. There's all of, I think, $17 million left in the public financing fund. So there's no way they're going to accept that and cut off their access to big money. It's not going to happen. But the Department of Treasury, which is a Democratic appointee, is using that rule, this rule, which is just not relevant at all, about having to prioritize the candidates running in the general on public funding. There aren't any, but they're waiting. They insist on waiting until those conventions are over, and then they have to allow them 2 weeks to weigh in as to whether or not they're going to use public funds. This is like a joke. It's a complete joke. It's an excuse for basically keeping us off the ballot and denying us the funding that we qualified to complete our ballot drive. So this is just to say, if anybody wants to have an anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker, climate emergency choice on the ballot, a choice for canceling student debt, making public higher education free, we are it for a truly, nationwide campaign with a strategy and on the way to being on the ballot across the country. So if you want a choice, please consider making a contribution to our campaign. Go to JillStein2024.com, because we have to crowdfund this right now, because the powers that be are holding on to our resources for completing these drives and making sure that we're on the ballot, that everyone has a choice for an anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker campaign.
I mean, this is fascinating to me because it's like everything you listed is what Democrats accuse Republicans of.
Yes,
Lack of election integrity, voter suppression, influence
exactly.
of money in politics, lack
Using
of fairness,
authoritarian,
transparency. Yeah. So
exactly.
as you were like, so is this fascinating to me? Because these are also the things that animate voters. So it's fascinating that you also tell me that like the mainstream media does not care about covering this. But we're here to cover it. Um,
This is the real press that I'm talking to.
I
The
mean,
other stuff, I call them the O-press. This is
oh,
the real press.
why, thank you. What do you say to people who argue that your candidacy only helps Trump win by not throwing your full weight behind the establishment nominee, Kamala Harris? Um, you are inherently helping take voters away from them and thus leading to Trump's reelection. And I mean, like growing up, all we heard and throughout college that voting for a third party candidate or an independent candidate is basically throwing your vote away. How do you respond to this?
This is the propaganda of the political elites. This is part of their 24/7 campaign, nonstop PR campaign to basically disempower their resistance. They do not want competition. This is part of how they suppress the competition, by making you think that you do not deserve your vote. Actually, your vote is your power. It is our only power in a democracy. Unfortunately, our democracy has been sold down the creek, so it's mostly run by big money. But the only power that we have is the power of our vote. Don't let them talk you out of your vote. They have to earn your vote. they want you to think that they own your vote. They don't own your vote. They have to earn it. They haven't earned it. All this fear mongering about Trump. Well, who is it that's conducting genocide? Who's been leading the charge in this genocidal war? That's been a Democratic administration, or leading the charge on suppression. And censorship, or leading the charge on, on the militarization of our police. You've probably heard about Cop City in Atlanta. Well, that's under a Democratic city council
New York
that
now.
is basic. What's that?
It's in New York now as well.
Yes. And Cop City is now, they're being built all over the country in just about every state. There are like 70 of these, police training academies that are under construction or they're already built. And who is it that's training our police? It's the Israeli occupation forces that is now engaged in formal training of our police, which is why we're seeing such horrific brutality that is rolling out against students, against everyday people. About what? About our right to free speech, our right to critique our foreign policy. It's supposed to be subject to scrutiny and debate. That was the whole purpose of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is first because we as the public need to be educated. We need a free press, and we also need freedom of speech. And we need the freedom to protest. This is like what American democracy is based on, but this is what is actively being suppressed, and especially by Democrats who are leading the charge here. So, the Republicans are notorious for challenging elections after the fact, but the Democrats are notorious for basically biasing and harming our elections before the fact. One is not better than the other. These are both absolutely unacceptable. So we say we don't have to wait for Donald Trump for fascism. We have fascism, which is here right now, going very well. And remember, the Democrats have had an awful lot to do with making the Republicans an extreme party. This is both because the Democratic agenda is an agenda of neoliberalism, which means austerity, privatization, and tax giveaways to the super rich. So this creates, like the 30 million jobs that have been lost over the last 3 or 4 decades. It's that kind of desperation that then, creates real momentum for demagogues. And by the way, the Democrats had a project called the Pied Piper strategy, by which they elevated Donald Trump. We know this from the leaks of the Podesta files. We know that the Democrats were in the business of giving Trump, a lot of publicity and promotion and really pushing him through their contacts in the press because they thought he would be the easiest to beat. Well, it's not just in that race that succeeded so well that they continue to use this strategy. And in 2022, in the midterms, they spent over $50 million elevating the most extreme Republicans in the primary, who they then beat, but then those Republicans go on to launch their careers in the Republican Party. So it's not like we have one party, which is the danger here, and the other one is okay. No, they're both really creating this absolute crisis of rising fascism and the destruction of our democracy and everything that goes with it. Look at the money that poured into Kamala Harris's campaign in a week. It was like $200 million. It was way more than Trump had earned. And than Trump had raised even, so the big money is really going to the Democrats right now. So neither of these are okay. And we should not be intimidated or extorted by fear into thinking that we have to silence ourselves, because if you vote for the lesser evil, you have silenced yourself. And if you want an end to genocide, or you want a student debt bailout, it doesn't exist. If you haven't voted for it, it doesn't exist. So if we want to move forward in any way, we have to stand up and own our votes so that we can own our future. Otherwise, we don't. So we really encourage people, do not listen to the politicians and the pundits who tell you to keep voting for them when they are throwing you under the bus. If you look at when the Democrats had their biggest electoral loss, it was the election of 2010, the midterms, where they lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures. They lost 64 seats in Congress and somewhere around 12 or 13 in the Senate, and the same number of governorships. It wasn't because of a third party. It's because they've thrown their base under the bus. They have lost this for themselves if they lose it. And right now they're doing such a spin job around Harris and Walz, that they're coming up. They may actually do very well in the polls, but still, people should not drink the Kool-Aid. This is like Obama 2.0. If you think Obama was good for working people when he threw, 8 million homeowners out of their homes so that he could bail out Wall Street, to the tune of trillions of dollars, we're kind of, being fed the same Kool-Aid right now.
Thank
So
you for that. Let me switch gears a little bit because we're running out of time.
sure.
You mentioned how the Israeli military is training our police forces. So now I want to shift gear to international world affairs.
Yeah.
There are two existential crises to organized human life, as we know: climate and uh, nuclear warfare. We're not going to talk about that. But almost a week ago now, Israel assassinated Faroud, which is the senior commander of Hezbollah in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, and Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's lead negotiator and lead political leader, in Tehran, in the capital of Iran. Escalating tensions in the region. What does this mean for the prospect of a wider war in the Middle East? How would you handle the situation differently to promote peace and stability? Um, you have made Palestine such an integral part of your campaign. Why is this so important to you? And lastly, want to touch on Ukraine. Things are escalating there too, thus bringing back this nuclear shadow. Um, how would you deal with that as well, relative to the status quo that we have right now? And we know how the Democrats will deal with it because they've been dealing with it. We know how Trump will deal with it because he uses Palestinian as an insult, and he said that uh, Israel should be allowed to finish the job. Um, and so we know what they will do, but interested in hearing a little bit about you. And apologies that we're running out of time. And then after this, I would love if you have the time to ask you our audience questions because a lot of Americans submitted questions for you that they're interested in the response.
Great. Okay, terrific. And if we need to run over a few minutes on my end, that's okay if that works for you.
But
But these are really important issues, and let me just try to address them as succinctly as possible. So, we are sitting on a powder keg in the Middle East right now, and we have been, for decades, basically, because Israel, has had basically a blueprint of ethnic cleansing from the get-go. And this was not clear for all the world to see until the Israeli National Historic Archives were opened up in the 1990s. And a number of Israeli historians took a look at it again and said that, no, basically, this is a policy of terrorizing Palestinians from the start. This is not something that happened. This was the plan, was basically to drive Palestinians out from the get-go. And it was a very violent plan from the very beginning. And we're seeing now kind of the end game, the consequence of 76 years, basically, of a murderous apartheid state and ethnic cleansing. And, it's been especially bad over the last 16 years. And October 7th didn't come out of nowhere. This is what happens when a people are basically being starved to death and murdered, in their daily lives. Israel has been, or I should say Gaza has been basically an open air prison where people are hardly fed. And then starting on October 8th, I think it was, massive starvation essentially was imposed on the whole population, and food and water and medicine and fuel were all cut off as housing was destroyed, as sanitation was destroyed. I mean, it is a living hellscape, and all institutions, housing, schools, universities, healthcare centers, hospitals, everything is destroyed. People are living, in absolutely horrific conditions, that almost like that are almost indescribable. Children are being targeted and shot by snipers, as are civilians in general, but especially children. What's going on is unbelievable. A population of 2 million people has essentially been tortured for 9 months, and they are being murdered. And this is just incredible. And Israel has really, through its broader hostile policies, it has really roused its neighbors. And these two back-to-back assassinations carried out last week has really, pushed this to the breaking point. And it's very telling that Israel assassinated the leader of the ceasefire negotiations. That tells you how much Israel is interested in negotiating a solution to this crisis. And and there have been hostilities between Israel and its neighbors for quite some time, and those are absolutely, going, just off the rails. The U.S. is fundamentally responsible here because the U.S. has enabled all of this. We provide the weapons, we provide the military funding, we provide the diplomatic cover, we provide intelligence. And it's so ridiculous that the US stands there and they wring their hands. Oh, how can we rein Israel in? I can't imagine how we could ever rein Israel in, because the US is the one that is enabling this. US could rein Israel in, enforce compliance with international law, with the ICJ decisions in the blink of an eye. And prior presidents have done this. Both Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan have done this when Israel was going over, was massacring people beyond the borders of Israel and Palestine. When the massacres, rolled into Lebanon, Reagan called it to a halt and basically, they can do that. They can do that because we are making it possible. So all we have to do is withhold the weapons, which, by the way, are illegal anyhow. Under US law, we cannot be providing military assistance to countries that are violating humanitarian law, that are interfering with the delivery of humanitarian aid, and which are violating nuclear weapons treaties. And Israel counts on all three scores. So that assistance is illegal to start with, just in terms of US law. So it's the president has the authority. I'm sorry?
You're referring to the Leahy law.
The Leahy law is one of them, yes, and there are two others as well, including that it's illegal to supply arms to a country that's in violation of nuclear weapons treaties. And Israel, has nuclear weapons, which it tries not to acknowledge, but it's clear that it does, which violates the non-proliferation treaty. So there are three laws basically that are being violated. So it's not hard for us to fix this. We have the power to fix this in the blink of an eye. And for the US to be trying to talk Iran and Hezbollah and Yemen out of responding to Israel's aggression is ludicrous, because we can control Israel's aggression and we're telling them to just like suck it up, but we're not doing anything about Israel's aggression. So it's not likely that this, these frantic negotiations that are supposedly taking place now behind closed doors, it's very unlikely that that's going to get anywhere, because Israel has powerful neighbors. They're all really mobilized right now. This is not just terrible for people in Gaza subject to genocide. This is terrible for the people of Israel. And there are, however many, I'm not sure what it is, 9 million, something like that. There are a lot of human beings who are in the crossfire right now. This crossfire is extremely dangerous. If we want the people of Israel to survive here, we need to bring them as well into compliance with international law. And we need to move forward with the ICJ resolution. So how I would do this if I were in the White House right now, or if I'm in the White House come, next January, we will deal with this by picking up the telephone and telling Israel in no uncertain terms that the genocide and the occupation are over, and that it's time to withdraw to the 1967 borders as the most recent, the second of two ICJ resolutions basically stated. So it's not hard to do this. It's very hard for an empire to back off, which is why we need new leadership, and we need to throw the bums out who are basically driving us towards potential nuclear conflagration right now on several fronts. And your question, I'll address briefly Ukraine as well. and then go to why this is important to me. But yes, Ukraine is another nuclear crisis, which is flaring right now. And thanks to the US having dismantled the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, we are in the process of moving these banned missiles to Russia's border, and Russia is responding in kind. This war being fought to the last Ukrainian for the purpose of simply bleeding Russia, simply, costing Russia. We're not going to defeat Russia. The purpose stated by the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, was we want to bleed Russia. We want to make them pay. So who's making them pay? The people of Ukraine and American taxpayers, because this military budget, all added up, costs us half of the congressional budget. The average American household is paying $12,000 for these endless wars just this year alone. So we're paying a huge price. They don't want you to think about it. These wars endanger all of us, and they are impoverishing us. Ukraine could have been solved. The US has been driving this along with NATO by expanding to the east over many decades, basically since the Soviet Union broke up. We have been pushing to move to the east, breaking our own promise that that would not happen. This is disastrous. Now it's like the Cuban Missile Crisis, but in reverse. Russia's touchy about its border. We're touchy about our borders. When Russian missiles came to Cuba, which, by the way, was in response to our having placed missiles in Turkey, so we kind of initiated that one too, although that was not discussed very much. But just in terms of, so Russia brought its missiles to Cuba. We launched our nukes. They were in the air in airplanes. So we were ready to go to war to get those nukes out of our border. That's basically what Russia is doing as well. All Russia wanted was neutrality in Ukraine. Neutrality like Austria after the Second World War, was agreed to neutrality. So this was a simple solution. And there were many opportunities. There was a negotiation after the war started, which was going well. Russia compromised. They totally proved false this notion that Russia would never agree to back off of some imperial adventures. Russia was not interested in those imperial adventures and was ready to make deep compromises. And then the US and the UK came in and broke up that treaty because they want, they want this war. Probably because the war contractors are calling the shots. Our foreign policy is being driven by the lobbyists and the campaign contributions. And this is a disaster. The basis for our foreign policy, much like the basis for our health policy, the basis for our housing policy, you name it. We need a democracy. We need a people-powered democracy, not powered by the biggest contributors. So then just quickly moving to why this is important to me. I grew up in a Jewish community, attending a synagogue, a Reform synagogue, right after the Holocaust. And it was a very, very big deal in our community and in my family about how you deal with a Holocaust, and let me just acknowledge that there are many communities out there, including the African American community, that has basically been subjected to a Holocaust. And, not to mention that there's also genocides taking place right now, in the Democratic Republic of Congo and so on. So, there are horrible things going on. So, for us in our community at that time, it was all about resolving that genocide will never happen again, not to anybody. And I was taught genocide is impermissible. Not to commit it, you can't commit it, and you cannot be a bystander to it. That was just so driven home. This is not something you can stand by and watch. And therefore, it shouldn't be allowed to happen to anyone. And Jews have a responsibility to ensure that, and in this case, we have sort of these fascist Zionist government of Israel, which is committing the Holocaust. They have to be stopped. And Zionism is not Judaism. It's not anti-Semitic to recognize that this is a genocidal government. In fact, in my view, to say that fighting genocide is anti-Semitic, that's the most anti-Semitic thing that you could say. So this is about stepping up to the plate and doing the right thing, no matter who's involved, and recognizing Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism has been actually controversial within Judaism throughout its history. And, we need we need to move past a fascist Zionist state and ensure that we have basically equal rights to security, full citizenship, and justice for all people in the region. And it's important to me because I grew up with this premise that we were not going to allow genocide to happen again. And that was how we put that tragedy behind us. And to me, it just evokes like the pain of my community in my childhood for that promise to be broken.
Thank you so much. Um, yeah, like I said, we weren't going to get through everything, but we did our best. And I just want to name something before we come to. During the debate between Trump and Biden, the internet, at least younger folks, were fighting about who is most coherent, who has their mental capacities intact. And you just flawlessly remembered a series of questions that I asked you and delivered effective and compelling arguments for all of them. So I just want to give you your flowers for that. Um, while the old white men fight about who plays golf better, you're out here actually talking policy. So kudos to you. Quick rapid fire questions from the
Great.
audience.
Okay.
We're over time, so quick. What can be the place of the Green Party in the bipartisan space of American politics? That's the first question from our audience.
We need to break up the bipartisan space. As long as you only have two political parties, it's like if you don't have a moving target, big money is going to capture them. And so we need a much more, we need a multi-partisan democracy. That is the purpose of the Green Party. It's not to take over our political system. It's like to give people choices. And right now people are screaming for choices like to stop genocide, to have an anti-war foreign policy, to have healthcare as a human right for everyone, to end student debt and make public higher education free, to have affordable housing. These are things that people are absolutely clamoring for, and you won't hear a word about this from either the Democrats or the Republicans. So this is just what the Green Party, the role the Green Party can play right now is by getting a choice on the ballot for the things that people are dying for, literally ensuring that we have the choice and letting democracy have a fighting chance in this election. It's a place to
How,
begin.
how do you view your role as the head of the Green Party within the American political system?
Yeah, so, I'm a candidate. I'm actually not the head of the Green Party. I do not hold a position in the Green Party's administrative apparatus. But the role I play in the American political system is, I'm kind of like the crash test dummy or something. I'm like what gets battered, and I'm sort of targeted and blamed for the failure of the Democrats largely to serve their own base. They've thrown their base under the bus and they got to blame it on someone, so they tend to blame it on third parties. And I've kind of been the visible person here, fighting this battle in several elections. So I get a lot of that, just like abuse and smear campaigns and fear campaigns, but they've been around for so long. I think people have kind of grown a little disinterested in these arguments that just get made over and over again. They keep saying I'm a Russian asset. Well, I was investigated for 3 years by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they came up with absolutely nothing incriminating. So, if I was a Russian asset, I would have been found um, guilty of something long ago. So, they keep kind of crying wolf, and it's just ridiculous.
And what are your visions for Iran and the Iranian people? And what actions would you take in office? And just to ask all of them in order, what actions would you take in office? The next one is, what is your plan to improve public transit, which is like just way different from the other kinds of questions we've had. And lastly, uh, let's answer those two and then I'll ask the last question.
And did you say the Golan, as in the Golan
Oh
Heights?
no,
What did you say?
the goal,
The
um,
goal.
like your goal in improving.
Oh, my goal in the political process?
Yes. And
Yes.
so the
Yeah.
first question is, what are your visions for Iran and the Iranian people?
Oh,
Uh,
I'm sorry, for Iran. Okay.
and what actions would you take in office? The second question is, what is your plan to improve public transit in America? And the
Okay.
third one is, what would you do about the national debt?
Okay. All right, great. So about Iran, I just want to acknowledge, we destabilized Iran back in the 1950s. We overthrew the democracy of Iran because we did not want Iran claiming its oil for itself. So the US and the UK basically overthrew um, Mossadegh, the democratically elected uh, uh, prime minister, president, whatever he was, and we substituted this brutal dictator, the Shah of Iran, who was there for decades until he was overthrown by radical Islam. It's important to recognize also that we have been sponsoring radical Islam going back all the way to the 1920s. So we've made a mess of Iran and much of the world. Um, the solution is not simple and it's not straightforward, but we have to stop trying to undermine, you know, sovereign governments, and we have to stop trying to overturn them. We need to find the basis for collaboration, and we could do that right now by averting a massive regional and even global war that's going on right now in follow-up to the Israel's assassination in Iran during as it was inaugurating a new president who wanted to improve relations with the West. So, we need a large scale transformation of US foreign policy, which is currently based on militarism and economic domination. We need to become a team player in a multipolar world. So, I'll just say that needs to be the overarching approach here. And we need to be abiding by international law instead of kind of creating our own rules as we go. We can get back to the nuclear agreement with Iran, and actually we have to step up to the plate and get rid of all nuclear weapons, ours as well. And that would create a very equitable
How would we
here.
be the hegemon if we do that?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. That's the point. And we have to choose between being a hegemon and going down in flames here, or not being the bully in the schoolyard and being a team player in a global community of adults. We are not behaving like adults. We're behaving like, unruly and extremely insecure uh, adolescent bullies is kind of US foreign policy in a nutshell. So we need to get beyond that. The
public
solutions are not rocket science. I'm sorry.
transit.
Transit, we need renewably powered public transit um, across the country. And we're not going to solve the climate crisis or our transportation crisis with electric vehicles. They may be part of the problem, but to pretend that like this is the solution, it's not. We need affordable public transit, and there needs to be a right to affordable public transportation. Ideally, that should be provided for free. Um, yeah, so I mean, in a nutshell,
Yeah,
that's
and the debt.
the debt. Yeah, the debt is a problem. And the debt, remember, is it's a product of corporate giveaways, of a massive military budget, and it can be fixed by doing the right thing. Austerity is not the solution to a budget crisis. We need a responsible budget. We need to, you know, we need to tax the rich who need to start paying their fair share again. We need to cut the military budget, one of our major expenditures, at least by half. And we have to stop making people sick because we actually spend 4 times as much as our military budget on healthcare. We also need to move to a Medicare for all system that will save $500 billion a year at the same time that we expand healthcare coverage and provide it for everyone. But we also have, we need a healthy food system. Healthy food needs to be affordable instead of just the junk that makes people sick. We have to stop polluting people's water and air. And we have to fix poverty, because poverty is one of the major drivers of, of sickness and mortality. It's the number 4 cause of mortality. So we, we can have a responsible budget without austerity. In fact, austerity is the opposite of a responsible budget. So we can bring our budget into balance and push back on the national debt, and we can do that quickly by cutting our military expenditures and cutting also our healthcare costs.
Lastly, you mentioned it earlier, but for those that want to support you, what's the best way to support you and your campaign?
Great. Yes. So please go to jillstein2024.com and sign up for our newsletter. You can look at the ballot drives by just clicking on the ballot access drop-down menu. You'll see a map. Click on your state. And there are many states in which the ballot drives are still going on. And you can help by collecting signatures, by carrying a petition. You can find out how to do that. It's not rocket science. You can just have your friends sign it. Go to demonstrations and rallies, and like-minded people will also want to sign it. So there are ways you can help concretely to ensure that we are on your ballot and on every ballot. I should mention Tennessee as well. I'm sorry, Kentucky, where we also have a ballot drive going on. That'll be the last one. And if you're in the vicinity of Kentucky, we could use your help there. And if you can make a contribution, we badly need contributions right now to make up for our dollars that the Democratic Department of Treasury is refusing to turn over to us. So we need to crowdfund this urgently to ensure that we have an anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker climate emergency choice on the ballot right now, when people are screaming for it. Once we're on the ballot, if we're on for just about all states, it will be very hard for the media to continue locking us out of coverage, which is what they rely on right now, because they know people want what we are offering, and they are quaking in their boots. The empire knows its days are numbered. So time for us to stand up and demand an America and a world that works for all of us. This really is within our reach.
Jill, thank you so much for being on Let's Just Talk. Thank you for extending your time with us, and we look forward to continuing these conversations with you.
Likewise, real pleasure talking with you. Thank you for your terrific work. Really appreciate it, honey.
Thank you.